I had every range of emotion while reading this book. Hi everyone, my name is Brittany from Brittany Loves Reading, and this is the start of my May wrap-up vlog. I'm going to take you through the month of May, and as I finish books, I will let you know what I rated them, my thoughts on them, what I'm using them for various readathons, etc., and I'll just take you along with me. The two readathons I'm working on this month are Bookemon. I have been doing Bookemon all year. This is a readathon hosted by Reading with Merb. It's a year-long readathon. I will link all the information down below. I am also participating in Escape the Readathon hosted by Books with Lexi, and I am on Team Snack Squad. So I'm very excited to hopefully help my team as much as possible with all the books I plan on reading. That being said, last week I was filming a challenge vlog, and for vlogs, I don't update after every book because the thoughts are kind of similar to what's in the vlogs. So I tend to update at the end of the vlog and just do like an overview of all the books that are in that. And if you want my really in-depth thoughts on those books, you can go check out the vlog for my really in-depth thoughts. But last week I was working on a vlog for a random number generator challenge where the random number generator chose how many hours I would read in the course of a day. In that vlog, I ended up finishing 3 books, so let's chat about those. The first one I finished was Where Sleeping Girls Lie. This was a very good thriller. Dark academia thriller following Sade. Sade finally goes to school. She's always been homeschooled. She goes to Alfred Noble Academy, and very quickly she is shown around the academy by her roommate. Her roommate goes missing, and Sade and her roommate's friend Baz, they form a friendship and start looking for her roommate Elizabeth. It takes them into kind of the underbelly of this school of entitled boys doing things that they definitely should not be doing and hurting girls on campus. And we see the school trying to cover things up, and we see them eventually find out what happened to Elizabeth. This was super twisty. I really liked what it was trying to say about the Me Too movement and the protection of girls and girls needing to come together to find their power. It was super, super, super atmospheric. And I really just love the vibes of this book, and I ended up giving it 4.5 stars. This was on Timmy's TBR for April. I started this in April, finished it in May. And it was on Timmy's TBR for my free space or mood read. Then I read Athena's Child by Hannah Lynn. This is a book that is a retelling of Medusa and Perseus. It really does explain the Greek mythology of these two characters, but was really, really accessible, and I found it very easy to follow. It was very short. It's under 200 pages, and I ended up knocking it out in one day. I love the writing. It was super lyrical, and gave this book 5 stars. For Bookemon, I ended up using this to get my 5th of my 12 chicken prompts. Every month we have to read a book that has black, white, orange, or yellow on the cover. This one has those. So this is going to be my May chicken. And for Escape the Readathon, since I'm putting this video out once the month is over, the readathon is over, I can tell you how I'm using everything for each prompt for that as well. And for this, I use this for horsing around in my intimidating read because Greek mythology, as much as I usually love the books, I always feel a little bit intimidated. Lastly, I picked up The Atlas Complex by Olivia Blake. I adored this book. I know a lot of people have not, but it really, really worked for me, and I gave it 5 stars. That's right, 2 5 stars back to back, and before that, a 4.5. It was a really good week for reading for me. This is the 3rd book in the Atlas 6 series, so there's really nothing I can tell you because it's the conclusion of a trilogy, and it would spoil so many things. But the way that we follow these characters, and the way that Olivia Blake got me invested, even in characters that I was not necessarily invested in the first 2 books, really surprised me. And then Olivia Blake took my heart out and stamped on it for a couple of parts at the end of this as well. I adore the writing style of Olivia Blake. I will continue to love Olivia Blake, and this was my favorite of the books in the series, which is very interesting because I don't think it's the favorite for most people, but it really did work for me. For Escape the Readathon, I ended up using this for the second option of the merry-go-round game to help unlock the game for my team. So I have finished another book this month. I finished Local Woman Missing. This was a buddy read that I did with Danny Dabbles. We took about a week to read this, and I really did enjoy this book. It's a heavier topic. It focuses on obviously a missing woman, but also in the very start of this book, we find a little girl who has been held captive for 11 years. She is now about 17 years old. She was taken when she was 6. She's been in captivity in a basement in horrific conditions that are told to us. And that is where we start off in this book. We see her escape, get away. We see her being found by a woman in the neighborhood and the police coming to get her. They find out she is this little girl who's been missing and return her to her family. And we follow 2 timelines of basically when Delilah went missing and now that Delilah is home. When Delilah went missing, her mother was actually found as a suicide. We don't know how those 2 things connect, but they do connect somehow because that is also when Delilah went missing. Her husband has constantly been looking for his daughter, and we also see her little brother, who was 2 at the time of her disappearance, now as a teenager having his sister come home. And that was my perspective that I loved the most in this book, was following Leo, who is the brother, and his very different and sometimes confusing feelings on having Delilah back. He always had to kind of live in the shadow of Delilah, so that was very difficult. But also he's seeing this girl who is his sister and feeling compassion for her and what she's gone through. There was also another woman that did go missing at the same time as Delilah, who was Shelby Tebow. We follow that story in the past timeline as well. And eventually we do find out what happened to Shelby, Delilah. The twists in these books I did not really see coming. They really did get me, which does not happen very often with thrillers. So I ended up giving this 4.5 stars. For Escape the Readathon, we were actually in the middle of a game when I finished this book, and luckily it worked for that. So I used this to play Fear Factor and to do Prompt 1, which was a mandatory read. I counted this as mandatory since it was a buddy read. So last week I focused on reading Kindle Unlimited books in honor of Nicole and Neva's KU Kindle Mayhem, and I ended up reading 2 books during that week, so let's dive into what those were. The first one was Heartless. I read this as part of the Chestnut Springs Along, which is hosted by Claire and co-hosted by Leandra and I. We are reading 1 book a month of the Chestnut Springs series, and this month is Heartless. All of them are on KU, which is how it worked out to be read during this week, and I adored this one. Everyone told me that I would love Daddy Cade, and it's true. I did. I loved it a lot. I gave it 5 stars. It may be my best romance of the year. I absolutely loved this book. Really, really enjoyed it. I love a single dad trope. I really liked being on the ranch. We got a lot of the Easton family ranch in this book. I loved Willa, who is our love interest. She's super sarcastic, liked her in the first book, really liked her in the second. And little Luke, little 5-year-old Luke, who is Cade's son, just stole my heart. And their relationships, the 3 of them and their different relationships, Willa's relationship with Luke, Cade's relationship with Luke, the little family they built was so beautiful. 5 stars. Loved it, loved it, loved it, loved it, loved it. And because I loved it so much, I ended up reading it all in one day, which worked out well for Bookemon because now I can use it for my UFO prompt, which is to read an entire 400+ page book in one day. For Escape the Readathon, we were in the middle of the Fear Factor game, and I used it for Prompt 1 of Mandatory Read. Since I am a co-host for this readathon, I had to read the book. Then I read Ink by Elizabeth Hunter. This is a romance based around a bookshop and a tattoo shop that kind of merge into one business. Emmy is taking over her grandmother's bookstore and she's going to redo it. She's moving back to her hometown. Ox is a tattoo artist that tattoos at the tattoo shop across the street, but he gets evicted from his chair and needs a new place to do his tattooing. They build this business called Ink and start a business together and quickly realize there's some chemistry there between them. I really liked the tattoo elements of this book, the bookstore. I really liked our characters when they were apart. Once they got together, there were some issues with their relationship that made it hard for me to believe that they should or could stay together. They bickered a lot once they were together and their communication was lacking most of the time or wasn't great when it was happening. And it just didn't work for me in that regard. But because I enjoyed the first part of the book so much, I ended up giving this a 3-star rating. For Bookemon, I used this to get my monthly Bookemon for May for a relaxing read. Romance, I always feel like is quite relaxing, so that's where I went with that. And for Escape the Readathon, I used it to get the Good Fortune prompt of most read genre. Even though I am back in my sci-fi and fantasy mood this year, my most read genre for the year is still romance. probably because they read so much faster than sci-fi and fantasy, so I just get through more of them in between the big chunky fantasies and sci-fis I'm doing. So I just finished The Unmaking of June Farrow by Adrienne Young, and I ended up giving this 4.5 stars. I read this in the vlog where Scavenger Hunt chooses my next read. This is where the Scavenger Hunt took me, and I'm very excited that I got to pick this up because I love Adrienne Young's writing. Spells for Forgetting was one of my best books of last year, so I was very much anticipating this book, and I did really enjoy it. In this book, we follow June Farrow. June Farrow's family has kind of been plagued by a curse. Their minds seems to start to show them things that aren't really there, and people think it's an illness, but we come to find out that it's actually a power that they have where they can travel through time. So because the family travels through time, their memories kind of layer upon themselves, and the things they're seeing are actually memories from another time. June goes back in time and finds out that there's quite a family mystery in her past, and she needs to kind of piece that all together and find out what is going on. I did find the family mystery fairly straightforward. Nothing really shocked me about where the book was going in that regard, but there were a couple reveals that did pull at my heartstrings, and that's how I got to 4.5 star rating. I really did enjoy my time reading this book. I read it very, very quickly over the course of 2 days, and Adrienne Young will kind of continue to be an auto-buy author for me. For Escape the Readathon, I used this to do the Unfair Wheel, which is a book on the top of my TBR. This was on my 5-star predictions list, and obviously it shot to the top of my TBR when I did the Scavenger Hunt, as it had to be my next read. So that's kind of how I used it for this prompt. So I have finished 2 books since I last chatted with you, so let's dive into those. The first one was my reread of Icebreaker. I did a reread to annotate Icebreaker. I love this book. I still loved it on reread. Gave it 5 stars. Again, I won't go too in-depthly on my thoughts as this is a reread and it was in a wrap-up only a few months ago. It has not been that long since I've read it. I think I read this in like February, sometime around then. It was very early this year, and I adore this book. Love it. Still loved it. 5 stars. I did end up using this for an Escape the Readathon prompt for the building heads up an author you've read from before. Because obviously I've read from Hannah Grace before. I've read this book and also the sequel to Icebreaker by this point. So that worked quite well. Then I read Bloodmarked by Tracy Deonn. I have been reading this for a while. I started it in April and it floated into May. And I really did enjoy this book, but there were some things that I didn't love about it. A lot of it was the pacing and also how we handled some of our characters. I really love the premise of this book. This King Arthur retelling, but also watching Bree discover her ancestral power of Root. It's a really interesting concept, and that's all I'm going to say about the actual plot of this book, because I need to kind of only talk about the plot of the first book, because obviously the second book would spoil the first. My one issue, or maybe a couple of issues that I had with this book, was that we would meet characters. They would be around for actually a pretty good amount of time, maybe like 50 to 60 pages, and then they would just disappear without really any explanation to where they were going. Bree would maybe leave, or a small cast of characters would leave to go do something else. And it just felt a bit disjointed with how the characters were appearing and leaving. And I would have wanted to kind of see maybe some more explanations around that. Also, because we are in Bree's head for the entirety of the book, or most of the book at least, we only know what Bree knows. And by the second book, I would expect Bree to know more information than she does. She doesn't really know that much about the society. She doesn't really even know that much about her root craft either way. Nobody around her seems to want to tell her anything. And I don't think she really pushes for that information as much as I, as a reader, would like her to. I want to know more about what is going on in both systems, and I don't know nearly as much as I think I should by reading almost 1,100 pages of it between the 2 books. But again, I do love this cast of characters. I really love what this book is doing with its commentary and the retelling and all that part of the book I really love. So there's things I love, things that I wish were done a little bit differently. So I ended up giving this 3.5 stars, and I am intrigued to see how this series wraps up. I'm wondering if this is slightly a bit of a middle book situation, where we were just trying to get everybody to where we need them to be for the final book, which is totally possible. That may be what this is. But where it was almost 600 pages, I just wanted a little bit more. I just wanted a little bit more stuff to really justify the 600 pages of this. And I really would have liked to go into the last book with a bit more knowledge and understanding of all the things that Bree only kind of knows a bit about. She has the outlines, but I really want to dive in. And because we're in Bree's head, we're not getting that because she doesn't know. For all my different readathons, this was actually on Timmy's TBR, not for the month of May, but for the month of April for the prompt of weapon on the cover. And for Bookemon, I'm using this to get my 1 of 6 prompts for the legendary sword, which is to read 6 retellings over 6 months. This is a King Arthur retelling, so check my first one. So I was just editing this vlog, and for some reason, I cannot find the vlog clips from 2 books I read this month, so we're just gonna redo it. I know I talked about them. Where that clip went, no idea, but we're just gonna insert it now. I read these about 2 weeks ago, so we're just gonna see what I remember about what I gave them. The first one was Mountains Made of Glass. I ended up doing this as part of a readathon that I did with my patrons. Both of these books I did in that weekend, and I scrapped the vlog. So I'm wondering if when I deleted the vlog footage, I accidentally deleted the wrap-up footage. Possible that that's what happened. This is a dark romance Beauty and the Beast retelling, and I had a fabulous time with this. It almost got 5 stars. The ending was a little bit strange, so I ended up docking it down to 4. But it's a really solid Beauty and the Beast retelling. It really did stick to the vibes of Beauty and the Beast. The Easter eggs were really, really solid. You even had some of our side characters. So we did have like a magic mirror that definitely had the personality of like Cogsworth and Lumiere pushed together. And we also had a Mrs. Potts character, which made me very, very excited as well. Both things were fantastic. I ended up, again, giving this 4 stars and using it for a couple of different things for readathons, so let's look at that next. I'm glad I keep copious notes because I would have no idea what I submitted this for Escape if I hadn't, but I do, so I do know. For Escape the Readathon, I ended up using this for Bullseye, and for Bookemon, I used it to get my 2nd out of 6 for the Legendary Sword, which is to read 6 retellings in 6 months. So I've now done 2. The other book I read over that weekend was Starstruck by Ivy Dawes. This is a arc that I actually had. This book is now out by the time you're seeing this, but I did have it as an arc. It's an indie published holiday romance. This is between our leading man and a PA on the set of the movie. When they meet, the PA is having a pretty rough day, hiding out in like a back garden on set and kind of crying and being very upset. Our main actor, James, actually has a prosthetic on his face because he's in a war movie, and she does not realize that's who it is when they meet. They hit it off. They get to know each other. They start texting back and forth. He does not admit to who he is right away. It's the only thing he kind of lies about is his actual name, and he says he's background talent. This only goes on for a matter of days before he does come clean, and he does explain why he does this. Because he wanted her to get to know him for him and not for being James, the movie star and son of the person who owns the studio. Had that gone on for a really long time, I would have had an issue with it, but I didn't mind it so much in this instance. I actually really liked this romance. I had a fun time reading about it. I liked how the author kind of had them realize that they needed to work on themselves outside of the relationship to improve their lives versus like a romance improving their lives. I appreciated that. And I ended up giving this 4 stars as well. For Escape the Readathon, I ended up using this for Ferris Wheel Prompt 1. So last week I ended up reading a ton of books trying to finish off my currently reading list so that I could go into June with a clean slate. I almost accomplished that. There were 2 I didn't get to. One was The Shadow Rising. I know I'm not going to get to that. The other is Sunbringer. And after I finished that vlog, I kind of said, I don't think I'm going to finish Sunbringer. Now I think I'm actually going to have time. You'll know in this wrap up if I finish it because I'll wrap it up. But for the vlog, I ended up finishing 3 books. So let's dive in and tell you what I thought about them and also what I use them for readathons. The first one was Their Vicious Games by Joelle Wellington. This was a book that I read for the Accidental Book Club with Bree. It started off really strong. We follow Adina, and Adina was accepted to Yale. due to an altercation with another student, got her acceptance removed. Most of the students that go to Adina's school are from very affluent families, and Adina actually is there as a scholarship student, and they look down upon her quite a bit. There's a lot of classism and racism going on at this school and in this book. So Adina loses her acceptance to Yale and decides to try and get into something called the Finish. The Finish is an academic competition between 12 females of this academy to win kind of the chance to become very powerful in society. Adina does get in. Adina gets into the Finish, and when arriving finds out this year is very different from what she anticipated, and it's not anything like what she expected. It is a fight to the death to actually earn the right to marry one of the Remington boys. And there was a lot of great commentary on classism in this book, but my main problem was you had these 12 girls enter. A lot of them did not know what was going to happen when they arrived. They did not know that they were going to be fighting over this boy. And there was very little question about that. They all were just like, okay. Not completely, and near the end, they did start questioning it, but I really wanted more of them going, what are we doing? Why are we fighting over a boy? Like, I don't understand why these really intelligent women just all of a sudden went, okay. And that's where I really got lost in this book. I had some other issues with it, but that was definitely my main one, so I ended up giving this 2.5 stars. For Escape the Readathon, I ended up submitting this 4 pages. Then I read Daughter of Mine by Megan Miranda, and I really enjoyed this thriller mystery. It definitely is more of a mystery, but I really enjoyed my time with it, and it really hit with the small town vibes. In this book, we follow Hazel. Hazel is going home for her father's funeral and finds out that he actually left her the house. There's a lot of contesting happening within her family because we find out that Hazel is not actually the biological daughter of her father. She actually didn't know him until she was a teenager when her mother married him. However, her mother disappeared shortly after. Her mother left without taking Hazel, and there's always been some sort of like mystery around why. Why did she leave, and why would she not take Hazel with her? They're currently in the middle of a drought in this small town, and the lake is lowering, and things are coming to the surface of the lake, including some things that might give us some idea of what's happening to Hazel's mother. And we do follow the mystery of that. We follow this small town and how a small town police force, and also even the members of a small town, might protect their own to some extent, might really know what's going on, but will keep their mouth shut for various instances. And that was the part I really, really enjoyed about this book, kind of having this glimpse of what may be all right in a small town and how they kind of govern themselves. It was really, really interesting, and I gave this 4 stars. For Timmy's TBR, this was on for my mood read and free space, and for Escape the Readathon, I also entered this for pages. Lastly, I read Here We Go Again by Alison Cochrane. This is a sapphic romance based around a road trip where 2 former students of Joe, our English teacher, decide to road trip it across the country to take Joe to his cabin in Maine. It's where Joe wants to live out the rest of his life. Joe has terminal cancer, and he wants to get there, and he asks these 2 girls to take him. They're now in their 30s, 20s, 30s, and they both work as teachers at his old school. Joe and Joe's story were the reasons I really enjoyed this book. I wish we would have just focused on Joe and Joe's relationship to the girls, how they kind of formed their own family over the years after he was teaching them, and also the things that Joe wanted to do before he passed on. The ending of this book made me cry. 100%, but I did feel like the romance fell a little flat because it seemed like an afterthought to the story of Joe. I didn't really need it, and it did kind of feel out of place, and the characters felt a little flat in the romance because it just was not where the story kind of naturally focused. I ended up giving it 3.5 stars, and I think some of that was also that I don't love a kind of road trip book. This was my first road trip book. I don't like boat books, and I was concerned that this may fall into that kind of same reasoning, and it did to some extent. But also, again, the romance falling flat also pulled away from it a little bit, but all the stars for Joe. If I was just rating off Joe, 5 stars. For this was on Timmy's TBR, is a book set in summer. And I also submitted this for pages for Escape the Readathon. So I finished another book, Battle Royal by Lucy Parker. This book I really did have a good time with. The romance took a minute for me to enjoy. It took a second. The romance was not immediately the part of this book that I liked, but it did grow on me after a while. What I loved about this book was the look at baking competitions. We followed 2 judges for Operation Cake, and we see them not really get along at first, and we also see the contestants as they try to win this competition, and there's some shenanigans going on. Both of these judges are also in the running to get the contract to make the princess's wedding cake, which will be huge publicity for their bakeries. So they're also competing in a different regard over there, and that competition and the royal drama was also really fun to read. So that was the part of this book that I really, really liked. The romance, as I said, it took me a minute to enjoy it. I almost would have preferred for most of this book for them to just stay in the competitive nature and have them just be rivals. But I did end up giving this 4 stars, and I am excited about book 2 because it follows our main male character's sister, Pet, and I really liked Pet. So I'm excited to read Pet's book at some point. When will I pick this up? No idea. For Timmy's TBR, this was on my TBR for a book set in Europe. For Escape the Readathon, I used this for Hard Hitter. And for Bookemon, I used this for the hanger for a book that has an outfit on the cover that you like. I really do think this dress is cute, so that's what I used it for Bookemon. So May is officially over. It is done, but I did end up getting one more book read in the month of May. I did finish Sunbringer. Yes, I did. I finished Sunbringer, and I adored this book as well. 5 stars. This is looking like it could be a 5-star series for me, and I cannot wait for book 3 to come out next year. I can't talk much about this book because obviously it is the sequel to God Killer, which I read earlier this year, gave it 5 stars. It's looking like it might be my best book of the year. And I may do a combo with the 2 and make them my best books of the year as the series, or as of what the series is that's already out. But Sunbringer starts right at the conclusion of God Killer. I'm glad I read them close together because it doesn't really remind you what happened. It expects you to jump in knowing exactly where you left off, and our characters are going through it. They are going through it. And because I am a character-focused reader and I absolutely adore these characters, it made my emotions just go all over the place depending on what POV we were in. My heart broke. I got angry. I had every range of emotion while reading this book. I went through every emotion reading Sunbringer, and that's really how I got to my 5-star rating. Any author that can make me feel that much is doing something that I really enjoy. Also, the commentary in God Killer and Sunbringer, top tier. Top tier, how much Hannah Kaner can put into under 300 in God Killer and 350 in this book is amazing, and a skill of writing. Hannah Kaner is quickly becoming an auto-buy author for me, and 2 5 stars for the first 2 books Hannah Kaner has ever written. But with that, we need to close out this vlog and look at how May went in total. In May, I ended up reading 16 books, which resulted in 6,029 pages. My favorite book of the month, and even though I absolutely love Sunbringer, I think it does have a little bit of setting up for what's to come in book 3. So it was not my favorite book of the month, but overall I think this series is going to be my favorite of the year. But my favorite book of the month was The Atlas Complex. I loved how this series wrapped up, and I adored this book. My least favorite book of the month was Their Vicious Games. I did not like this. You've seen it. We're not going to rehash it. This was a 2.5 star for me, and we're going to just leave it there. But that is the end of May. I have already dived in to June and Tar, so I am very busy. So I'm going to leave you here, and thank you so much for watching me for the month of May. If you have nothing to say to me down in the comments, leave a sun emoji. I think that's appropriate for Sunbringer. Thank you so much for watching. Please like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.